Welcome back, everyone. New lens from Sony today. This is the 16-35mm f4 power zoom G lens. So we haven't seen a new power zoom lens in a while from Sony, and I think that this lens actually marks a bit of a first because there's a shift in the technology that's going on here. So allow me to explain. Sony has been using XD linear motors for autofocus for a few years now. So essentially this is a rail system. The focus elements slide along that rail system, and there are no moving parts necessarily, so everything is electromagnetic. So taking that concept of a highly efficient and pretty much silent rail system and applying that to XD linear motors to drive zoom now, you're able to automate and do things electronically that you couldn't do before. I think this is going to be a very ideal lens for people who shoot video. Also want to note some things about the physical characteristics of this lens. So on the lens itself, Sony has actually included 3 manual control rings. So you have an aperture ring at the bottom, which is actually unusual to see on a G lens. Usually you only see these on the G Master lenses. Above that, you've got the focus ring as well as the zoom rings. On the side, we've got the power zoom toggle, so you can go tight or wide. We've got a custom function button. You can manually switch between autofocus and manual focus. We also have an iris lock, which is actually used very commonly in video, and the aperture is declickable. Another thing I want to note here, in case you can't tell, well, let me give you something for comparison purposes here. Hold on just a second. Let's get this off. So I don't know if you can see this or not. So this is the 24mm G Master, and I'm using this because this is a popular lens. It's also very light and compact. Now this is a zoom lens, so it's not a prime. You're going to see that if you compare these two side by side, the 16-35mm f4G power zoom lens is actually a little bit shorter and slightly lighter. So it's a bit more compact than a prime lens even. Also worth noting is that Sony is using an internal focus design as well as an internal zoom design, so the length of the lens does not change as you focus and zoom. And because it's all electronic, this is going to give you some options that you wouldn't get with a standard zoom lens. So if you're using this lens with compatible cameras, so this includes the Alpha 1 as well as the A7S III, the FX3, the A7 IV, and also the ZV-E10, you can actually program the speed and some zoom moves that you can do internally, and you can also do these remotely. Now with other cameras, then you still have the power zoom on the side, but this is where it opens it up and it's going to give you some additional features. In fact, I think the best way to do this is I'm going to switch out the lens and I want to actually film with this so I can show you. Hold on one second. I also need my remote. Okay, so I've got the remote. Let's go ahead and switch the lens out now. Okay, you're probably not going to notice a big difference in the image quality. So I'm now filming with the 16-35mm f4G power zoom. This is the lens I film pretty much all of my videos with. This is the G Master. This is the f2.8 16-35mm. It's a lot bigger. It's not an internal zoom, obviously, and it's also not a power zoom lens. But in terms of optical quality, I think you're probably not going to notice too much of a difference. In fact, a little secret, I've actually been filming a lot of videos with this lens, including the one I did on composition and layering a few weeks ago. That was all done with the 16-35mm f4G. The reason you're not going to notice much of a difference is I tend to, with a full frame sensor, record everything at f4. When you go more shallow than that, it makes the face kind of weird, and looking at a talking head kind of situation, it just does not have the right effect. So I typically, f4 is the widest I will go with a zoom. Now that does not include other things I might be filming. If you want a shallow depth of field on something else, just don't think it looks very natural on human beings. But anyway, I want to make a point with this lens now. All right, so Bluetooth remote. I can use this to start and stop the recording on this camera. I can now also use it to control the zoom. So I can go wider if I want, I can go tighter. And the cool thing is I'm using the FX3 right now, and I can actually go into the menus and adjust the settings. Just like I have options for autofocus, we now have options for power zoom. So I can go in and set it fixed versus variable. I can control the speed, both in standby and recording. It gives you a lot of nice options. So I don't know, you guys have ever seen the movie Jaws? Actually, this is a technique that's used in a lot of films, but the whole idea of this vertigo effect, right? So typically what you're going to do is dolly the camera in. I'll simulate this for you in a second. The old days, this would require, many people to operate the camera. So you need somebody to control the dolly on the camera because the camera's going to move. Then you need somebody to pull focus and someone to pull zoom. And so we can kind of simulate this. Here, let me see if I can get it going on. Now, I'm just going to move. We're not going to dolly. So while that's an effect that has a very specific use, there are a lot of options, I think, in terms of being able to do remote shooting for video and even using a drone. Which brings me to the optical performance of this lens. Now, there are a lot of special use elements in this lens, and despite the fact that it is ultra light and compact, it performs at the level you would expect from a Sony lens. It has excellent sharpness corner to corner, color reproduction is outstanding, contrast is really nice. However, there is one design trade-off with this lens, and I'm going to show you an image here. Not a great image, it's of a window, but if you look at the lines on the sides of that window, they should be straight. They are not, and there's an enormous amount of barrel distortion. You're not going to notice this when shooting video. In fact, I was shooting video with this lens earlier. It is corrected in camera. You didn't notice anything. I think for video, it's perfectly acceptable. When shooting JPEGs, it's going to be corrected as well. When shooting RAW, you're going to need a Lightroom profile. And at the time I'm filming this lens isn't even out yet, so there is no profile that exists. You have to correct it manually. And this is not the end of the world. It's just I'm a little bit of a conservative purist in this sense, and I would rather see that be controlled with optics and not digitally, because I think, and this is arguable too, you could potentially lose sharpness. I only think you're going to notice it if you have a very large print of a very high megapixel image. That's probably where, and even then, maybe people won't notice it. But I don't know, for the price, the compact size, it's not the end of the world, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And to be fair, just about every camera manufacturer on the market does this. Sony is the one that hides it the least. In other words, Fujifilm, Canon, Nikon, they usually use built-in lens profiles to some degree, and so it's just pre-programmed in the camera, and even with the RAW file, you're not going to notice it, but it's there. Just one note. Even despite that one flaw, this is still an excellent lens, particularly for video. I still think if you are primarily a still shooter, in other words, you don't really shoot video at all, I think the 16-35mm G Master is going to give you even better optics, and of course, it's an f2.8 lens as opposed to an f4. However, for video, especially run and gun, where you need something compact that's lightweight, that's easy to carry, this is an awesome option, and it'll be interesting to see if Sony do power zooms and other focal ranges as well, and I think this is actually something that's very useful for video. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you guys. Drop me a comment below. Until the next video, I'll see you guys then. Later.